Hello and welcome back, and it's time for another Plex Media Server NAS test, but today's slightly different. This is the first time on the channel I've actually tried to do a Plex Media Server test on a router. Now, calling it a router is a little bit disingenuous. This is the combined mesh router and NAS system, the QMiroPlus-201W. This is a NAS system that already has a built-in mesh router system going on in the background with all the configuration and control of a 3-frequency AC 2200 mesh router, but it also has a NAS built in. It's got 2 storage drives inside, and it arrives with an Intel Celeron CPU quad-core. So that is a J4125 CPU, quad-core 2.2 gigahertz, 2.0 gigahertz CPU that can be burst up to 2.7 gigahertz and 4 gig of memory. And the system right now, I'm running some typical background processes, nothing too aggressive, and at the moment you can see there the QNAP Cloud Link, the kind of memory being utilized. And if we have a look, some of the system processes and a few QMix agent stuff for another video, I'm using about 2 gig of the available memory, and I've got a little bit under 2 gig of memory ready to use in today's test. Now, as always, I'm going to be utilizing the same files that we always use in our Plex Media Server testing. That is a variety of movie files in 720 and 1080p, and of course we will be running those Jellyfish test files as well. So what can we talk about with this system? Again, this is a quite unusual thing for me. Normally when I do these Plex tests, I am using a sole NAS, and this system that arrives about 400 to 500 NECA, depending on where you are in the world, is a combined 2-bay Intel-powered NAS system that's also a mesh router. It's not Wi-Fi 6, unfortunately, but it is Wi-Fi 5 with support of 2.5 GBE, QNAP's own SD-WAN software and QWAN, a bunch of other stuff with virtual machines and surveillance. That can all be run on this system, but a number of you might buy this just so you can have an integrated Plex system. So without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. And again, I'm going to keep this here for the Jellyfish files later, but for now, let's start testing these files. I'm going to mute my laptop because of the YouTube AI angry bots. And I'm going to crack on with the file we always use, the matrix. As you can see, it's already scraped all the metadata there, all the information in the background, all of the information from Rotten Tomatoes, it's all there. So without further ado, let's just play this file. It's an H.264 file, and it is 720p, less than 1 full megabit per second bit rate, so it's quite low end. And again, we can flick through this. We are accessing this via the local area network, as you can see here, so do bear that in mind. Although a number of you will still use Plex at home and enjoy the metadata scraping on your own systems. Absolutely fine. CPU, absolutely nothing to worry about. Memory, as you can see, the system's using more with those background processes, but Plex isn't getting too hungry. And you can largely ignore the bandwidth one there because that's just network traffic. So let's start with a little bit of transcoding. We're going to go from 720 down to 480p. And straight away, it's an immediate transition, absolutely fine. I should highlight, I'm not using Cayenne or Cyan player with an HEVC or H.265 supported compression, and I have not enabled hardware transcoding with the CPU transcoding engine in the background, something I might do halfway through the video, but I wanted to use this without embedded graphics for the first half of the video. Once I see the system start to struggle, then I'll start using the encoding. And I'm not using the Plex fix either, where we played with Plex.xml. This is the system running as is. But as we can see, absolutely fine with the transition to 480p. So now let's break it down crazy low. Let's go down to 160p there. Bear in mind we are using screen recording software, which more than likely will affect some of the playback there. But this is low res, incredibly, there's like 9 pixels on screen here. And we're seeing the little jumps there in the CPU utilization, but I think we're absolutely fine there. And again, very few people are ever going to watch a movie at that kind of picture quality, but bear in mind, if you're watching on a very limited data connection on a phone, on a tube train in the middle of nowhere, you might get away with this on a mobile. So I think we can stop watching Plex there. We might transfer it through to the original quality just to let it flick, to give you some idea how quickly it can flick back to the original quality. Oh, it's going compression, my mistake. Playing the original quality. as you can see, absolutely fine. And that's thanks to it being an H.264 file. So let's come out of it, and now we're going to go into Little Shop of Horror, as always, our second test file there. Going into Little Shop, and again, all the metadata, all the scraping, all that stuff we expect from Plex Media Server, doing all of that on its own. We can go ahead and click play. Leave that to play. Again, absolutely fine. Don't worry about that delay. It looked like a delay at the beginning. It just takes an extra second for the initial trailers to kick in. But fine, as you see, absolutely great. And once again, I say this on a lot of my videos, just because some people still don't know. This is actually the different ending of Little Shop of Horrors, and so many people like myself went through most of our life not realising that there are different endings to this movie out there. So that was just kind of my little bit of public service there. So let's go on, that's original quality at 1080p, so now we're going to flick it down to 720. Let's go down to 720p high bitrate file, and again, not too much going on. Again, I know this is a combined NAS router, but even then, it's a decent little box to be able to do some of this transcoding very early doors, but we've not got onto the really aggressive stuff yet, and I will be very doubtful if this system's going to be able to do some of the really top-end transcoding. This is still a Celeron CPU after all, and I think 4K, I doubt this system's going to have that kind of clout. So let's go down to 480p, give it a second. This is generally where we start to see, the boys from the men. We're seeing it there. There's a little bit of a delay while we're flicking between it. 480 from 1080p is actually quite difficult. We've noticed it before when we've done these transitions, and we're seeing a bit of a jump there. But as soon as we flick each time, we're seeing plenty of background caching being done there. So again, let's go down to the lowest now. Go down to 160p, aka where have all the pixels gone? And as you can see, absolutely fine. You can just about make out Bill Murray there, and the CPU utilization isn't too bad, in fact. So from this point, we can make our way into the Jellyfish files. These are, of course, our more dense medias. These range, if we zoom in a little bit there, these are the ones where it's the same 30-second file in a range of different bit rates and a range of different compression techniques, with H.264 being native, and HEVC and HEVC 10-bit media, HDR. These are the ones where the system requires compression due to the majority of multimedia systems and players not having access to HEVC or H.265. It's a triple pattern problem. We talked about it before. It's super annoying. You can remedy that on a QNAP, I should add, by enabling Cyan Player, an application that allows you to add H.265 support to your system. But again, you may not want to do that as a separate player or application. So if you have a look there and find Cyan Player, you can enable it, but it is an additional fee. And again, it's a bit annoying. So a lot of people just like to know that they can play it natively. Again, sorry, shouldn't have done it. Zoom out. Sorry, didn't want to mean to play that. We're jumping ahead way too much there. So we'll play the nice, easy, standard file there at the beginning. It will play. It's a 1080p, but it is an H.264. Absolutely fine there. We can transcode it down. It's going to be a harder job than the other ones we've done earlier on, but it's still not going to be too hard a job for the system there. I think I've confused it there with clicking too much one after the other. Just before I continue, I will also highlight again that the Jellyfish files, as you can see, as you go through the different higher bit rates and the higher compression techniques, and then from 1080p into 4K, the file, even though all of these are 30 seconds long, they get all the way up to 1.4 gigabytes in size. Bear in mind, the file we just played was 10 megabytes. You know, we are talking a little over 5 to 6 floppy disks in size, compared with just an enormous amount of data there. So do bear that in mind. Even though it's the same file, as we scale up through the playbacks, it will get harder and harder. So this is an HEVC, otherwise known as an H.265. Harder going, you will see not only that the system is forced to convert it into a more playable format, but the CPU, just to play back this file, will have to work harder. So if we convert it down to 720p, go through 8 megabits per second bit rate, let it play there, we can see that it still manages to do it, but we are still seeing the CPU have to, pull its finger out a little bit there to get some more playback done. If we go into the HDR version, the 10-bit, we can go there, open it up there at the bottom, playback error, and this is going to be where we have to enable that encoding. So we're going to go into the managed server settings, go into the settings, go into the encoder, the transcoder. We want to do that because we're using a Plex pass. Bear in mind you will have to have a Plex pass in order to utilize these services, and that will enable that feature for us. So we can go back, head back into the file settings here, and try and play back that file once again. Again, it will have to convert it, but allow at least it has the ability to do so. So as you can see, still using a lot of system resources there, and it's going to ramp up as we go through all the different varying types of compression and file technique, but still nonetheless it was still able to play back this 1080p HDR file. So now we're going to ramp it into the 10 megabits, and again I'm going to very quickly play through the H.264 files for you, just to show you that at H.264 these files will play pretty much consistently and easy every single time. So if we go for every single H.264 we've done, let's do the 30 H.264 again, just to zoom in there. HD H.264 plays the file, caches a little slower, works a little harder, but it will play it, and we can make that way from 30 now into 100 megabit H.264, and it will seemingly play pretty easily. Again, 100 megabit H.264, caching's absolutely fine there. CPU utilization just ebbing into the 20% mark occasionally, but as you can see, this is when we're starting to see it struggle to stay ahead of the playback. Now, it still manages to stay ahead, but getting the buffering done ahead of that is taking its toll. And when we move into 4K files, and we have two H.264 4K files here in UHD at 120 megabits and 200 megabits respectively, this is where we're going to start to see struggle. So again, this is the 4K 120 megabit file in H.264, but nevertheless, it does look like it's going to play at least some of this file. We've seen the buffering there happen, but it appears to have stalled out. And as mentioned, 4K is where we kind of knew this system would struggle. It can play 4K natively using QNAP's own video station application. That can be done, and it has its own native video player with metadata scraping and more. But as you can see, at 4K, it really did struggle. If we convert it automatically, it will try to change that file into something potentially a little bit more playable. But we wanted to see if this file would play natively. And if we've enabled conversion, it can work a little harder. And it is buffering it. But at this rate, I think playback will get very, very close to buffering there. So you're not going to be able to fast forward and backpedal too much there. But at least it was able to do it as a conversion. And finally, we can look at the 200 megabits per second H.26 file before we move over to HEVC and HEVC 10-bit media. Have that there. And again, as you see, it really is going to struggle now. Not only because the resources we've got are being pushed to their very limit, but also just 4K Plex transcoding. As you see, we are hitting a problem there. So let's cycle back now to the H.265 or HEVC media files. We'll go to the 10-bit HDR. Leave that there. And again, it converts automatically, obviously, because it's HEVC, but still a highly effective video codec. But again, it played all the way through, which is fine. Now we're going to go to 30 megabits per second HEVC. This is where I think we're going to start to see cracks. Because look at the speed of that buffering there compared with the speed of playback. It's going to win, but barely. Maybe not even then. It's staying ahead, but the system resources are just getting plum-tuckered while it's trying to do this. It would finish that. Look, the buffering's all the way to the end. I think that's absolutely fine. So let's move up to the 100. And 100 is where we saw H.264 peak before we were forced to go into transcoding. But this is an HD H.2 HEVC file. And again, it is getting ahead, but hardly romping it ahead overall. I think maybe this would continue ahead of playback for the continuation of playback if you're watching like a movie, but not a vast amount. But yet it did manage to finish it. So let's end this on the 4K files now. We're going to go for a 10-bit. So this is HEVC, sorry, this zoom in a little bit. This is HEVC 10-bit 4K 120 megabits per second. This is a monster file. Let's see how it does, and as you can see, it is just hit a wall. It's just not going to do well with this kind of thing. It's just going to, it's going to give it another try, but I think it will almost certainly kick us out. I'm impressed, though it has to be said, not only because this is a NAS router, but just generally that the CPU, this will be one of the first times we see that CPU eke above 50%. We've seen it predominantly not going higher than 40 for the bulk of this testing, but that is ever so slightly marred by the idea that at the same time as this, the system, when it has tried to go higher than that, it is just kicked out, as you see there. So now we're going to go for the final two. These are the 200 and the 400 megabit 4K HEVC 10-bit files. Almost certainly these won't play. And before I play them, don't come away from this video thinking the Qmiro is no good for media. This is still a combined mesh router NAS system. And also, to be able to play back these two files on this channel, these two files I've had here to consistently play with no problems and not tax the system to breaking point. Only about 4 NASs in 2 years have played back these files with faultless returns. So it is not any kind of neg to this device that it can't play these files, because there is no way it can play these files. It might give it a damn good go, but personally I think it's going to struggle there. Again, we're seeing it. It's buffering up. It's going. I think it's done everything it can, but when we see it stop at that part of the line there, it's not very good for us. We can convert to an automatic, but we don't really want to do convert automatically because that can be more flexible during playback with variable playback returns. And also that will scale, but it's got up to the 10-bit mark once again. Are we going to see it scale out? Doesn't look that way, guys. I think we are looking. Oh my god, it actually pulled it out of the bag. Good god, well done, that machine. And it's even scaled ahead. Yes, it has scaled it down to 1080p and the system is chugging a little bit, but at least it did the job. It had to scale it down to 1080p. As you can see, 4K is where this system is going to bottleneck. So let's go to the final, the big bad mama. This is the one that obviously isn't going to play in native playback. You can hear the fans on the system have just kicked in. Can you hear that? The fans in the system were forced to kick in as the internal temperatures have ramped up a little bit there. But look at that CPU there. It is stabbed up to 100% there. The first time we've seen it throughout this entire testing. And the conversion, it's still doing the preset H.265 conversion. And fair play to it. It is trying, but I don't think we're going to see success here. And I know I could just convert this down to automatic and it would switch it to 1080p. But we're trying not to do that. We want to see this system stand on its own. We want to see an underdog story, but sadly not. Let's see what it would have done had we converted it, just for the hell of it. If we'd converted automatically, that fan in the background having to ramp up on the device, a fan that on this mesh router system we've not really seen spike that much throughout the course of this video, and particularly when we've been taxing this system. But it does look like this system is going to have to give up at this tier. Still, nonetheless, this has been what I would say an incredibly successful testing of the Qmiro system. I'm not going to say it's going to challenge any Intel i7s or i5 systems. Don't worry about that. That's when I was doing drive pullings for an earlier test video on QSync. But yes, I think this system here is good as a NAS, and for Plex Media Server for a home user or someone that's going to be utilizing predominantly 1080p media in Plex but still wants to use transcoding, this is still a very good system. Just bear in mind that it does take advantage of 2.5-inch SATA SSDs or hard drives, so your capacity may be a tad limited. You've got USB ports there, but then what's the point of having a NAS if you're going to use those? Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe. I'll look at that, kick this out. And do take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares. I can't stress this enough. I say it in every video, and I'm sorry if you keep hearing me say it. It's a free advice section. It's manned by two humans, myself and Eddie the web guy. We do answer every email. And if you are looking for free advice, troubleshooting, help with your setup and more, or you just want to know the right solution for your setup needs, use the free advice section. It's impartial, it's free. We don't take any of your information. You'll have to put an email so we can email you back. It's not used for anything. And other than that, there's the odd donate button if you want to chuck us a cup of coffee. But apart from that, we will see you next time.